Alright, we are kicking off a brand new series tonight called Blank Screwed Up. Tonight we're looking at He Screwed Up. Specifically, what do you do when someone else messes up? When they make a big mistake, even a little mistake, or a series of mistakes. There's a disclaimer on this, and it's at the top of your listening guide. We're not talking about willful, intentional, rebellious, continuous sin. Okay? What we're not talking about is a Christian friend who just is intent on living in sin. They know it. They're choosing to do it. They don't care about the consequences. They don't care about whether or not it's right or wrong. They're just doing it anyway. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the unintentional just screw-ups. The unintentional, man, I promised God I wasn't going to yell at my mom or dad anymore, but we just totally had this all out, no holds barred fight. And I just let loose, and now I feel horrible. Or I promised God I was going to stop drinking at parties, but I was at this party, and I was like, I'm not going to do it, but then I did, and I had a little too much, or I promised God I was going to stop gossiping, but that person is really annoying, and it happened again. All right, that's the kind of stuff we're talking about. All right, mess ups. When you don't mean to, you know you messed up. What do you do when one of your Christian, we're talking about Christian friends here, okay? What do you do when your Christian friend screws up? And this is very relevant because all of us at some point are going to screw up. How do we respond to that? What does God's Word have to say? And I want to start with an example from my own life, something that happened very recently to me. One of the students at my former church, she'd been on tons of mission trips with me, strong walk with the Lord, loved Jesus, really involved in church, wanted to do right, texted me a couple weeks ago and told me that she was pregnant. She's engaged, and she asked me to help officiate her wedding this summer. So I was really excited for her, and this guy was a good Christian guy. He's really good for her, but she texted me and she said, I'm pregnant, and the baby is due before the wedding. And I was just like, ugh. I mean, because if anyone was supposed to win, it should have been her. Right? She should have been like to hold out. He should have been the one to be like, no, we're not having sex before we get married. We are going to stay pure. We're going to do that. He dropped the ball. She dropped the ball. It was just, I was like, she sent me this in a text, and I was like, how do I even respond to this? Like, what do I do? Because I'm in the position where I'm also, kind of on board to help marry them, right? And I already know that they're obviously not living the ideal Christian lifestyle. And so this is something that I deal with too, guys. And at the end, I'll tell you what I actually did and how I responded. You're welcome. So now you have to pay attention the whole time. All right, so I thought it'd be really good for us to look at real people kind of acting out, going through what would it look like. So we're just going to look at what would Jesus do, popular bracelet that came out when I was in middle school. It's actually on my guitar strap, my What Would Jesus Do bracelet. Funny story, one of my friends stole my What Would Jesus Do bracelet at our church Labor Day retreat when I was a freshman. And he was wearing it around, and he was trying to tell everybody it wasn't mine. He didn't have one before we went, and then mine went missing, and his was the same color. Anyway, his What Would Jesus Do bracelet, he stole it. Funny story. All right, so we are going to look in John chapter 4. We're not going to read all of these verses. I put the whole kind of narrative in parentheses here. We're going to pick out a couple points in this, but just to set this up, this is Jesus and the Samaritan woman. Most of you are probably familiar with the story. Some of you might have most of it memorized. What's happening is that Jesus has decided he's going to go and minister in the region of Galilee. instead of going around Samaria, he walks right through the middle of it. It's hot, it's about noon, he sits down at this well. And a woman, a Samaritan woman, comes up and she's drawing water, and they enter into this conversation. Alright, now the reason we're looking at Jesus interacting with this woman is because I put a little asterisk and I said, see truth and theology in action through Jesus. In the Bible is really cool because it's got like commands, but then it has all this narrative. And you need the narrative to interpret the command stuff. Like they all are linked together. So sometimes if like something's confusing, if you're like, how would this play out in the real world? Go to the narratives and look. And that's what we can do a lot with Jesus. So we're just going to look at verses 7 through 10 first here. It says that soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, please give me a drink. He was alone at the time because his disciples had gone into the village to buy some food. The woman was surprised, for Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. She said to Jesus, you are a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink? Jesus replied, if you only knew the gift God has for you, and who you are speaking to, you would ask me, and I would give you living water. The first thing we need to keep in mind here is that, yes, later we find out what this woman's lifestyle is like, but at this point, Jesus already knows her lifestyle. He knows she's screwed up and might be messing up at that current moment. Okay, he knows everything about this woman right here, but, okay, he still chooses to enter into conversation with her, even brushing aside all the cultural kind of biases and differences. Jews looked at Samaritans the way we look at terrorists. Alright, so if you want to know what do Jews think about Samaritans, think about how you feel about terrorists. Strap bombs to themselves and blow up little babies and women and children in grocery stores. Okay? That's how the Jews felt about Samaritans. It was a deep-seated animosity, but Jesus chooses to enter a conversation with her. And it's very interesting that he always kept the focus on himself. He kept the focus on Jesus. That's your first blank. Kept the focus on Jesus, which normally, if you only talked about yourself with people, would be a very selfish thing to do. I don't recommend that. Okay? But if you're Jesus, right? If you're the Savior of the world, and if you're the hope of humanity, you know, that is actually a very selfless thing for you to do. Always talk about yourself. I put a little verse in parentheses, John chapter 6, verse 29. Some people are asking Jesus, what is it? We want to do the works of the Father. What are the works of the Father? And Jesus says, you need to believe in me. That is his response. This is how you do God's will. You believe in me. Believe really means confident trust. So put all your trust in me. And so whenever we're dealing with your friend royally screws up, okay, they have sex with their boyfriend or their girlfriend. They accidentally get drunk at a party. They screw the profanity of their mom or dad. They tell you they want you to die and to leave them alone. Okay? They go behind your back and they betray you. Alright, when we got a friend who screws up, we could choose to focus on all these different things, right? Jesus always kept the focus on himself. And we need to do that too. We need to keep the focus on Jesus. It's about, Christianity is about the person of Jesus Christ. It's not about doing right stuff or being good. Yeah, that's a portion of it. But essentially, and at the center of it, it's about Jesus. And so, if you keep it centered on Jesus and who he is and what he is like, and trusting, living out, trusting him in everything, then you can't get sidetracked into some of the pitfalls that are easy to fall into when you have a friend who messes up. The second thing is that he remembered he was talking to a person. He remembered he was talking to a person. He didn't see this woman as an adulteress. He didn't see her as a good-for-nothing Samaritan. He didn't see her as an inferior woman. He saw her as a person. Just like all of us are people. Sometimes when we deal with our friend messes up, especially if it was an offense against us, we forget that they're a person and we just think of the offense. We think they are the offense. But they're not. They're a person. They're a person with a complicated motive and complicated reasons and lots of stuff going on. We need to remember that we're all in the same boat as people. Nobody in here is like super perfect, awesome, spotless, I never screw up. We're all the perfect set of circumstances away from doing those things we think we'll never do. We're all the perfect set of circumstances away from doing those things we think we will never, ever do. Alright? Remember, he was talking to a person. He just talked to her like a normal person. He wasn't like, oh, I need to be really careful, or, ooh, you know, I don't want to talk about this, or I'll just pretend I can't see her, you know. He spoke to her like a normal person. A lot of times we want to avoid maybe someone who wrongs us with a screw-up, or someone who's just screwing our life up. We want to avoid them, but Jesus really went out of his way, actually, to spend a lot of time treating people like they were people. Does that all make sense? Y'all tracking? Anybody got a question? No? Okay. Alright, well, let's move to the next passage. We're going to read verses 16 through 26. We're not going to get too terribly explanatory into all of them. We're going to pull out a couple observations. Verse 16. The conversation has gone on. Jesus has talked a lot about living water. And in verse 16, Jesus says, go get your husband. Jesus told her, I don't have a husband, the woman replied. Jesus said, you're right. You don't have a husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and you aren't even married to the man you're living with now. You certainly spoke the truth. Sir, the woman said, you must be a prophet. So tell me, why is it that you Jews insist that Jerusalem is the only place of worship, while we Samaritans claim it is here, at Mount Gerizim, where our ancestors worshipped? Jesus replied, believe me, dear woman, the time is coming when it will no longer matter whether you worship the Father on this mountain or in Jerusalem. You Samaritans know very little about the one you worship, while we Jews know all about him, for salvation comes through the Jews. But the time is coming, indeed it's here now, when true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. The Father is looking for those who will worship him that way. For God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. The woman said, I know the Messiah is coming, the one who is called Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. Jesus told her, I am the Messiah. Alright, there's a lot of stuff going on in this conversation, but I think the thing that stands out most to me is that Jesus just totally lays her life open like a book. So that blank there, it's Jesus kept the tension without condemning. Kept the tension without condemning. What I mean by tension is the tension between the ideal and what you're currently living. Right? We all know that there's an ideal. Right? You all are aware that there's an ideal way to be a child to your parents. Right? But there's tension because you know, for most of you, I'm just going to assume that you're probably currently not living that ideal. And there's tension. Jesus kept the tension with this woman. He said, hey, this is your lifestyle. They both knew what the ideal was. Instead of going around it, he just went right through the middle. And the way he did it wasn't in a condemning way. It wasn't in a smart aleck. It wasn't in a I'm so much better than you. We know that because we look at her reaction. Alright? If Jesus was being a jerk here, she just would have left. Something else would have happened, but instead she continues to talk to him. Right? She doesn't shut him down, and so we know that Jesus isn't saying this to rub it in her face. He's merely admitting, yes, the tension is here. Sometimes we want to, when our friend screws up, we want to err on the side of explaining in a way and saying it wasn't that bad. I'm sure you won't do it again. It's not a big deal. Let's just move past it. But guys, that tension can actually be a very, very good thing. Because the tension reminds us who we are and it reminds us who God is. A lot of what we want to do today is we want to do away with all the tension. Right? Especially like a sin. We want to say, nobody's perfect. We all make mistakes. It's not a big deal. That's just who we are. Let's celebrate that, actually. Let's appreciate the fact that we are all screwed up and messing up all the time. We want to get rid of the tension. We want to take God's holiness away. We want to take away the ideal because we know we're not living up to it. But that tension is actually a very good driver driving us to God. And so when your friend screws up, sometimes it can feel nice to explain it away, brush it under the rug, just want to move past it. But let that tension sit there, because God can use that. The second thing is that Jesus focused on spirit and truth, not law. Spirit and truth, not law. The Samaritan woman quickly wanted to get Jesus bogged down in this kind of religious, who's right, who's wrong, kind of debate. And Jesus quickly elevated the conversation. He said, listen, God's not about, where the place is or what's written in your version of the Torah versus the Jewish version of the Torah. He's about spirit because he is spirit, and he is about truth. Not about, being as good as you can be or meeting a set of standards. And I think that's very, very important when we're dealing with people who screw up. A lot of times we assume that the way to be a good Christian is to be a good person. Like our goal as a Christian is to be a good person, to not do bad stuff. That's not really the goal of being a Christian. Right? Jesus said the work of the Father is to trust in Him all times. Not keep a big checklist. Is being morally good part of it? Yeah, that's a product of trusting in Jesus. But to weigh people down with the law and say, you're a bad Christian because you screwed up. Well, actually, you would be being a bad Christian for slamming that down on their shoulders, right? And most of us know when we screw up. Mostly people you don't have to convince that they messed up. And so it's centering in the spirit and in truth. In other words, understanding the truth about who God is, who Jesus is, and what His desire is for us, is to have our complete trust, is to have our faith completely sealed in Him, and to worship God for who He is, not trying to remake Him into our image or put Him into some kind of framework where He does what we want Him to. Spirit and truth. And so when we're dealing with our friends who have messed up, it's remembering they're people, keeping it focused on Jesus, talking to them about Jesus, not about, well, you're really screwed up, and this is why. I'm going to read you all the Bible verses that tell you what a screw-up you are. But keeping it centered on Jesus, keeping the tension there, admitting, yes, that was not the ideal there. That hurt people. That hurt me. Without condemning them, and then making sure we're staying focused on that. We're pursuing God in spirit and in truth, not in the law. There's some other helpful things. One, don't relieve the tension. I just want to really emphasize that. Not relieving the tension. Okay? Let God deal with the tension with your friend. Okay? And sometimes you might be in a situation where maybe your friend screws up because of just ignorance. And maybe you've got a friend who's a Christian who doesn't know it's wrong to drink before you're 21, right? We're not going to get into that whole debate right now, but we're just going to sit around for you guys. The reason you don't drink is because it's against the law, and the Bible tells us that we need to follow the law. Maybe you've got a friend who just hasn't ever encountered that anywhere in the Bible, has never heard that before. And they just need to know. And so you can be like, did you know, actually, that the Bible says we're not supposed to do that? Maybe they'll be like, no, I didn't know. And so your encounter with the tension can be just exposing them to those scriptures. Like Romans 13 says we need to obey the laws. In Ephesians 5:18 says we need to be filled with the Holy Spirit, not with alcohol. And so just encountering that with them. And so sometimes that can be the case. The second one is dwell on how God deals with you. Dwell on how God deals with you. I think this is a big one. This is a huge one. And this is why we're going to go and read our Romans verse now. We're going to look in Romans 2, verses 1 through 4. This is going to help us understand this dwell on how God deals with us. Setting up Romans 2, 1 through 4, what Paul has done the whole first chapter of Romans is basically told everyone, you're all sinners. Okay? He's told the Jews, they're sinners. He said the Gentiles, they're sinners. And he's gotten very specific and has just finished making this big long list of sins. And then in chapter 2 he picks up and he says, you may think you can condemn such people, referring to that big list of sins, but you are just as bad and you have no excuse. When you say they are wicked and should be punished, you are condemning yourself, for you who judge others do these very same things. And we know that God in His justice will punish anyone who does such things. Since you judge others for doing these things, why do you think you can avoid God's judgment when you do the same things? Don't you see how wonderfully kind, tolerant, and patient God is with you? Does this mean nothing to you? Can't you see that His kindness is intended to turn you from your sin? This is a huge passage because of where it falls. Paul really has spent all this time talking about how bad everyone is. And now he's addressing the Jews specifically, and he's saying, listen, you don't have any foundation to stand on to condemn anyone else, regardless of whether a Jew or a Gentile or whatever. Because you do the same sin. He's not talking about like, you both rob banks, but you're both selfish. We're all selfish, right? We're all prideful. We all put our own interests above others. We all say hurtful things to other people. We all have moments of greediness, all right? We're all kind of fall under there, and so it's not our job to go around condemning people because God is wonderfully kind, tolerant, and patient with us. So that's why I say dwell on how God deals with you. I can look back and I can look back at my past, especially my first couple of years of high school, and look back at just the huge punk that I was. I was just a jerk on purpose. And I can look back at that and I can see how God dealt with me. And I can honestly say that God has never once rubbed my sin in my face. He has reminded me of the tension, and He has reminded me who I am in Him and what He's called me to. But He's never said, hey, well, remember that time when you really screwed up? Hey, Will, just look at how horrible and dirty and good for nothing and sinful you are. No, He's always said, hey, look what I have for you. Look what I've made you into. Look what I'm calling you into. God doesn't rub our sin in our faces. God doesn't shame us. He convicts us, which is very different from shame. And so, we want to be imitators of God, just like it says in Ephesians chapter 5. We want to be imitators of God. And so, when we're thinking about dealing with our friends who are messing up, even if it's hurting us, we want to give them the same grace that we have been given. I know that can be hard sometimes, and it's a lot easier to just condemn people or write people off or ignore them, or talk about them behind their back, or let them know how you really feel. There's a John Mayer song that says it's better to say too much than not say anything. This is the opposite of Christian, okay? It's better to not say anything than say too much. All right? Words have power. And you can kill someone with them. And so dwell on how God deals with you. And then James, the James reference is James 1:19. James 1:19 is a very familiar verse in James. It says, be slow to speak, slow to get angry, quick to listen. Be slow to speak, slow to get angry, quick to listen. Alright, whenever we're dealing with somebody, sometimes you're just not going to know how do I react to this? How do I bring this up? Slow to speak, slow to get angry, quick to listen. Quick to listen. I know that tonight I haven't given you like a follow these 3 easy steps to, dealing with your friend who's royally screwed up in their Christian life. Because there isn't that, right? People are complex. And most of the time situations are much more gray than we like to think. As teenagers, you tend to think of the world as black and white. Decisions as black and white. Circumstances as black and white. As you continue to age, you're probably going to find that things get much grayer. That people's motives get much more complicated. That all the details going into circumstances get much heavier and more intricate. And so we don't want to deal with like 3 easy steps. We want to deal in attitude and atmosphere and principle, seeking to be like Jesus. Okay, and so I've given you some helpful hints, and some attitudes, and some things to remember. I've also given you some other helpful passages you can look up on your own time that are very, very good. One of them, Matthew 7, that was from our reading. It's been from our reading. We've already gotten past that. Galatians 6, 1 through 5 is a great passage, and Ephesians 4, 31 through 32. Excellent passages to go by, kind of steer your ship. We're kind of dealing with these situations. Our takeaway is a little different. It says, pray for your friends, and I gave you 3 passages. These passages don't say, pray this for your friends. But they're actually very cool prayers you can pray for your friends. Just as an example, all right, we're just going to do the Colossians one. Turn to Colossians 1:9. Sometimes in Paul's letters, he writes out what he prays for the churches he's writing to, for all the people in them. And one very cool thing we can do as Christians is we can pray those same prayers because we know they're good and they're God's will because they're in the Bible, right? So it's like automatic, yes, this is a win. So in Colossians chapter 1, verses 9 through 12, it says, Paul's writing, he says, we have not stopped praying for you since we first heard about you. All right, we ask God to give you complete knowledge of His will and to give you spiritual wisdom and understanding. Then the way you live will always honor and please the Lord, and your lives will produce every kind of good fruit. All the while you will grow as you learn to know God better and better. We also pray that you will be strengthened with all His glorious power, so you will have the endurance and patience you need. May you be filled with joy, always thanking the Father. He has enabled you to share in the inheritance that belongs to His people who live in the light. So what do? You take that prayer that Paul is praying, and you pray it for your friends. And this doesn't mean you just pray for people who screw up. Pray for your Christian friends now. Just when you're praying for, like, for example, when Stephanie's praying for Mikey, and instead of just praying that, Mikey gets good grades, or praying that Mikey, that God would help Mikey, to be nice to her sister, or, okay, we could list a bunch of stuff like Mikey asked Stephanie to pray for her. Stephanie can also say, you know what, I want to pray for Mikey's spiritual relationship with God. I want to pray that Mikey grows strong as a Christian young lady. And so you go and you would say, God, I ask that you give Mikey complete knowledge of your will and that you give her spiritual wisdom and understanding. I pray that you would lead her in such a way that she lives her life with honor, she pleases you, and so that all kinds of good fruit comes out of her lives. I pray that you will help her grow to know you better and better. I pray that you will strengthen her with your power so that she will have endurance and the patience that she needs. I pray you would fill her with joy. I pray you would give her an attitude of thanksgiving. I pray that you would remind her that you have given her a huge inheritance, that you have made her the light with Christ. You take that prayer and you change it from the second person here, is you change it to the third person for your friend. And you pray it for them. And you know this prayer is powerful, and we know this prayer is effective because it's in God's Word. He's given it to us for that purpose. There's Ephesians and Philippians prayers are very similar to the Colossians one. And so if you want to up your game in supporting and encouraging your friends who are Christians, pray these passages over them. Write it out on a note card. Carry it with you so you can pray them all the time. Pray these for your parents. Pray it for your siblings. Anyone you know who's a Christian, you just insert their name in there. And if there's stuff you don't understand, ask, what does this mean? So you can put it in your own words. Does that make sense? Yeah? Kind of like, not all like, but some like, yeah, I can totally do that.